everyone.
I'm Jerwin.
And I'm Kyla.
Today we will be continuing to discuss our previous lesson, the influence of feminism and feminist linguistics. But today we will be focusing on Daniel Maltz and Roth Burger. They are both feminists, and on language difference. Okay, so one of the most remarkable contribution of feminism is this what we call the difference approach. So basically, it's kind of like a positive viewpoint or perception on the language of women, as opposed to the first two, which are the deficit and the dominance, which is very discriminatory to the language of women. But this time, we have this difference approach, which is positive, which is on the positive side. Difference approach contends that
Although women may tend to talk distinctively, they may also talk differently in conversation with women than with men.
according to Jennifer Coates, it is very important that we do not conflate the women's language. When we say conflate, it means we should not discriminate. So, Jennifer Coates said that we should not discriminate the women's language. Why? Because for example, they people said that it's deficient, it's kind of like inferior, but you know what? That is something for a purpose. That's for a reason why they have that silence. So Jennifer said that we should not discriminate it. I'm pretty sure that we already know about the first two approaches, which are the deficit and the dominance, which sounds like very prejudiced and judgmental on part of the women's language, isn't it? However, they are accused.
Work in the dominance tradition has further been accused of representing women as passive and as victims and of using women's subordination as a complete and pan-contextual explanation for characteristics of mixed sex talk.
With a hindsight informed by post-structuralism, women's silence, absolute or relative to that of men, for example, can sometimes be read as actively subversive rather than enforced. In some cases and contexts, a meaningful and creative strategy of resistance. So it doesn't mean that when women is silent or when women are quiet, they are inferior. It doesn't mean that they are quiet and they are deficient or they have a deficient language. But that's for a purpose. That is the view of difference approach.
In addition, cultural differences approach, in contrast with the male dominance, was relatively unconcerned with masculine verbal power.
According to Maltz and Borger, girls and boys grew up largely in different social linguistic subcultures, and that any communication problems in women's and men's talk can be related to Gomper's notion of interethnic communication, namely that problems between people of different ethnic groups are the result of differences in systems of conversational inference and the cues for signaling speech acts and speakers' intent. Seeing women and men as members of different speech cultures, comparable to those of speakers of different languages, however, requires examination. So basically, it is expected that men and women have difference in language use when they are exposed to different subcultures. So when they are in different social linguistic environment. So their language will be affected and they perform and use the language with different degree of proficiency.
Cultural differences, researchers and theorists aim not only to describe but also sometimes to positively evaluate women's talk, in particular all women talk.
Jennifer Coates is concerned not to denigrate women, however, unintentionally, for example, not to represent them as deficient language users or as victims. When we say denigrate, it means belittling, so belittle. So according to Coates, she is concerned with not to belittling the language of women. Okay, so those are the influence of feminism and feminist linguistics in the study of language and gender.
That's it. So I hope you guys learned something from our discussion.
God bless.